Good evening and welcome to the Monday, March 7th, 2022 committee meeting of the Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee. My name is Justin Saltzbach. I am the town manager. And if I could just have a board introduction starting to my left.
Amanda Phillips. I work at the Housing Authority in town.
My name is Adam Gardner.
I'm Lionel Cludia.
Adrian Guerrero, I'm on the Finance Committee.
Deborah Bradley with the Recreation Commission.
Mark Dorwart.
Dave Romanowski, working on the park, the new park in town.
Excellent, thank you. And just a reminder, if you can, to try to speak into the microphone so it picks up your voice for folks that might be watching at home or want to watch a recorded broadcast. I want to thank all of you first and foremost for volunteering to be here this evening. I know a lot of you are spread thin, have a lot of different obligations. So I appreciate your service to the community. First order of business would be to do a full board organization. So selecting a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk who would be taking the minutes. So with that said, and I understand some of you have more board experience than others, so if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. Is there a nomination among the room for a chair?
Is anybody interested in being the
I
chair?
don't really know anyone else and their responsibilities, so I don't know who's qualified at the moment.
Sure, would you like to?
Your husband does a good job. Maybe you'd like to step in his shoes.
Maybe I can run through a presentation first, warm the group up a little bit, and then we'll create a little bit of dialogue, and then from there, maybe that will get the creative juices flowing.
Okay.
All right. So up on the screen here, we have a presentation from the Community Preservation Coalition introducing the Community Preservation Act. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me mid-presentation and we can help you out. So the Community Preservation Coalition is made up of about 7 different organizations, all sharing common goals that are threaded throughout the Community Preservation Act. The coalition website seen here above is a pretty useful source of information if you want to take some time to click through if you haven't already. If anybody watching at home, talks about different CPA data points and also has a good playbook for adopting the CPA should that be a point of interest for the committee down the road. The Community Preservation Act is a state enabling legislation passed in 2000. So basically what that means is it's a law that the state put into place, but it doesn't take effect within your local municipality unless there's a local vote to enact it. So in this instance, you would have to go through the process of a town meeting vote or a signature initiative to get it onto the state ballot election, local ballot election. So it would go from here to either the annual in May or a special upcoming in the fall to have a town meeting discussion. And then if it passed at the town meeting, you would have to go to a ballot vote. So the Community Preservation Act itself is I mean, it's a lot of different things, but it's a potential source of revenue. I think is one of the most important pieces here. It focuses in 3 areas: historic preservation, open space and recreation, and community or affordable housing. So there are 187 cities and towns in the Commonwealth that have voted to enact this piece of legislation since it's been in existence over the past 22 years. That's 53% of municipalities, accounting for 65% of Massachusetts residents. And of those 187 cities and towns, not a single community has voted to revoke it once they put it in place. So this is a map that gives you a good overview. We are right over in the middle. And you can see our neighbors to the west, Royalston, to the south, Templeton, have both enacted the CPA. Areas in white are communities that have not adopted the CPA. Green are towns, and yellow are cities. So I think gives you a good kind of visual representation. The Community Preservation Act has assisted in funding over 14,000 projects, which comes out to about $2.65 billion within the categories that we described. So, and this seems kind of broad, so we're talking about historic preservation, we're talking about open space, outdoor rec, affordable housing. So some example of those in Winchton would be the old Murdoch restoration, which is presently going on, is an excellent example of historic preservation. It's on the National Historic Register. That is a project that would qualify for CPA funds. Down the road, if the schools wanted to build a turf field, that would fall within recreation. That's something that would fall under the CPA fund. If a farm went up for sale in town, or a large piece of wooded property that the town had interest in purchasing and preserving, you could make that purchase as a community through the Community Preservation Act. And affordable housing, so if there was a push to, and it's something that came up at a recent selectman meeting, but trying to get to a 10% threshold for affordable housing in the community is the recommended number by the Commonwealth. We're currently within the 8 and change figure. If you wanted to find a targeted area within the community that you wanted to build affordable housing, you could dip into CPA funds for that as well. So where does this money come from? I think it is the important question, and what does it look like? So it is a surcharge on local property tax bills. You can do it within a range of 1% to 3%. And the state contribution comes from the CPA Trust Fund, which is funded annually, pretty much every time that you go to file something at the Registry of Deeds. That surcharge that you pay goes into the CPA account with the state. So that's how the state funds their match. The community determines their surcharge level and which exemptions to adopt. So, for example, if 3% were determined by this committee to be an appropriate figure, if there is an appetite for this in Winchton, the amount of funds raised would be matched by the state on an annual basis. So if $250,000 were raised on the local level as part of that surcharge, the state automatically on an annual basis would contribute $250,000 to the Community Preservation Committee. And I think this just kind of gives you an idea in terms of historic trends. They consider about $50 to be the quote sweet spot in terms of what a taxpayer is typically up for contributing, and you don't really want to exceed that. So there are also some exemptions that ease the burden off residences. Or residents, excuse me. So you can knock off $100,000 off the residential property value. So when we're saying that this is a surcharge on your tax bill, if you have a $300,000 home, for example, the formula would treat your home like a $200,000 property. So it provides a little bit of relief right off the bat. That is the recommendation that the state provided for Winchton after running the numbers, although that's something that I would leave up to this committee to be determined. There are also exemptions for low-income families and low, moderate-income seniors. So that's another thing that comes up. The desire to try to be sensitive to those that are on a fixed income. Typically, our seniors are hit hard by that, and so when you're implementing a surcharge, you want to make sure there's some type of safety net so that you're not effectively taxing those folks out of town. And there is a full commercial and industrial exemption option, but only if you have a split tax rate. We don't have a split tax rate here, so that wouldn't be part of the conversation. So this is a run through of kind of an example of what it would look like. This is if it was a 1% surcharge rate. So if you're taking the assessed home value, subtracting the $100,000 exemption, that reduces it to $316,644. In this example, the municipal tax rate is $15.38. That would mean that the total tax bill would be $4,869. So this surcharge, that 1 to 3%, is 1 to 3% of what the actual tax bill would be. And I guarantee the rest of this topic isn't quite this dry and boring, so try to stick with me here. There is a disbursement that would roll through from the state every November. It's administered by the DOR, the Department of Revenue. The funds come from fees charged on documents filed at the Registry of Deeds. And just as an example, in 2021, the base match was 39.4% of what communities raised at the local level, meaning that if Winchinen contributed $100, the state would contribute about $40. Now, Winchinen is in a unique situation. The formula that the state uses does take into effect communities that are disproportionately impacted economically or in perhaps a difficult economic situation. And while we fall into that category, that would mean if the community committed to a 3% match, 3% surcharge, the state would counter with a 100% match. So that's where that figure comes from. If we raise $250,000 on the local level, the state would match 100% at $250,000. That's not something that's offered to most municipalities in the Commonwealth. So to talk a little bit about the process on adopting this, there are two paths, as they say. One is a legislative body vote, so that would be annual town meeting or special town meeting. Or you can collect signatures of 5% of registered voters in the community. So there are two options there. If you have an affirmative vote in either of those categories, then you would go to step 2, which would be to vote on the CPA at the next regularly scheduled municipal or state election, which would occur in November. So if implemented, the CPA would be made up of the CPC would be implemented consisting of 5 set members, 1 from the Conservation Commission, 1 from the Planning Board, 1 from the Housing Authority, 1 from Parks and Recreation, or its equivalent, and 1 from the Historic Commission. So you need to have 1 by law from each of those committees represented on a Community Preservation Commission. And then you may select up to 4 at-large members, so just general open citizen seats. So if the Community Preservation Act were passed in Winchinen, one of the biggest complaints I've heard is that that pot of money would just be a slush fund and that a small group of people would have control over that, that revenue, which isn't the case, and I think this kind of highlights it. So the surcharge as well as the state match would go into a separate account, so it can't be blended in with our general fund. The only way to access funds from that account, you would have to go through a process. So you'd have to go through the Community Preservation Commission, the group I just described, that would eventually be appointed. That committee would have to vote to approve an expenditure from that account, and then that specific project would have to go to a town meeting vote to receive an affirmative vote from every single member of the community that attends the annual or special town meeting. So there's a large amount of oversight over this. There wouldn't be situations where people can just control the money and do their own little pet projects. It really would have to be a community vote. The Community Preservation Committee would assess the community's CPA needs, accept or review project proposals, get input from the public and boards or committees, and recommend CPA projects to town meeting. So how would a project happen, for example? So proponents of any given project in town, once again, whether it be a historic preservation initiative, a purchase of open space, the creation of a trail, treating a body of water for invasive species, all of those things would fall under the Community Preservation Act. Proponents of that would have to come before the CPC. The CPC would review the project and get input. The CPC would recommend that list to the legislative body, which is town meeting, and then a majority vote of the legislative body would be required for the project to actually be initiated. There are rules for CPA spending beyond that. So by law, 10% has to go towards affordable housing. 10% has to go towards open space and recreation, and 10% has to go to historic preservation. There is an optional amount, 5%, for administrative fees, so if there's staff support or anything like that. The remaining 65%, you could divvy up whichever way you'd see fit. So you could do 75% goes towards open space and rec, with 10% to housing, or 10% historic, for example, or whatever iteration you choose. Part of that is dependent on the needs of the community. And I would say, looking at our recent capital plan, it would be my recommendation to skew towards historic preservation, because that's some of the expenses that are coming up, but that would be something that would be determined by the Community Preservation Committee once it's implemented. This is just a useful little chart about what type of projects would or would not be, from a broad view, eligible for the use of CPA funds. So, for example, you could use it to acquire open space, to acquire a historic property, to acquire a recreation initiative, or to acquire affordable housing. You obviously can't create something historic, and so that's why it's in the no category. In terms of providing support for different projects, in terms of financial support, so you couldn't use it, for example, for maintenance of an existing recreational facility, but they do have an allowance to provide support for affordable housing. So that's kind of what that breaks down to. In terms of repealing the CPA, it is required that it has to stay in place for a minimum of 5 years once it's implemented. After the 5 years, the act can be repealed at any time, and that also includes amendments to the surcharge percentage. So, for example, if it went in at 3, the community accomplished a lot over 5 years, and the community determined that we don't want to necessarily get rid of it, but we want to reduce it down to 1.5. We want to reduce it down to 1. Pick a number. You can do that, and it would have to be at a town meeting vote. These are just examples of some signage that they require to be posted outside when CPA projects are ongoing. And then just a few examples throughout the Commonwealth of different preservation and CPA-related projects that went into place. So you have here the Gloucester Town Hall, for example, which is a beautiful building if you've ever gone by, the Randolph Stetson Memorial Hall, and the Sandwich Town Hall. You can use it for the adaptive reuse of historic buildings, of which we have many in town. So there's good examples of music halls, or the Concord Historic rehabilitation of their Theater for the Arts. You can also use it for document preservation. So it's not just historic structures, it's preserving any type of your local culture or history. And it's an unfortunate combination that municipalities tend to have a wealth of historic documents, but also have very limited resources to preserve these documents. So it's an excellent resource for that as well. The creation of playgrounds in different parks is something that would be on the table for CPA, whether it be at the schools or throughout the community. Athletic fields, so basketball courts, baseball fields, anything along those lines. Biking trails, which we do have a rail trail in town, but we have sections up by, the Webster area where there's been conversations about potentially cleaning up that area and extending the rail trail towards New Hampshire. That's something that would be an allowable expense through the CPA. Community gardens, great initiative, and something that I think might go hand in hand with what Heal is working on in town. And then, as we mentioned, affordable housing for families and individuals earning up to 100% of the area median income. Housing for veterans. So the MVOC project at the Poland Streeter schools, that'd be an eligible source, but that project is already occurring. But just as an example. So you may have noticed through these slides that you see a lot of post-industrial communities and communities with a lot of old buildings and limited resources. And I would say that Winchendon very much falls into that category. So the reason that we got this committee together is because it's not a determination that we wanted to have made in a vacuum, and the selectmen were very much committed to that thought as well. I felt it was important to bring this forward to members of our community through this committee because I think it's a pretty good opportunity. I think Winchendon has a lot of unique challenges, financial and otherwise, and this would be a guaranteed match that would bring about $2.5 million to town over the next decade that otherwise we wouldn't have. And where there are about 187 other municipalities in the Commonwealth taking advantage of these funds from the state, we don't get a single penny of it year over year over year. But we have a significant amount of projects and needs in town that fall within these categories. And so I wanted to, at minimum, facilitate the conversation with this group, of which, as I mentioned, we have a quorum. There's 11 of you, but there are 7 here tonight, to at least start the conversation. And I do want to reiterate, I appreciate that each of you volunteered. So with that in mind, just giving you an idea of what the financials would look like. And this is on the back of your agenda. And these figures are preliminary. They're provided maybe 6 months ago. They're based off of fiscal 21 numbers. If this actually made it to a ballot, we'd be working with fiscal 22, or even at that point, if the tax rate is set, fiscal 23 figures. And so they're subject to change, but I just wanted to give the group kind of an idea of what you'd be looking at. So as I mentioned, in order to get the 100% match from the state, it would have to be the 3% surcharge. You could go lower, but you wouldn't get the 100% match from the state. So the second set of boxes on the bottom here shows you the annual CPA surcharge with the first $100,000 of residential property value exempted. Now this chart shows the average valued home at $219,573. There's a couple points I want to make there. One, once again, this data is 2 years old, and I think the average value has gone up beyond that point. Secondly, from a statistical perspective, the average isn't always the best indicator. Really, you'd want the median, and that kind of weights more towards the center, so you can get a feel for what the real kind of the true average, or at least what people picture in their head as the average number would be. So with those two disclaimers, what they have at this time using this data was the average home at $219,573 would see a surcharge of 3%. With the 100% exemption, it would come out to about $56 annually. If it were a $300,000 home, it would come out to about $108 annually. If it was a $500,000 home, it would come out to about $215 annually. And so what I would like to do is work with this committee to devise a chart that is maybe more representative of real-time numbers, because I think that's a big part of this equation. I think if you were to ask anybody in town if they had any interest in seeing any of these initiatives that we just listed, historic preservation, creation of trails, parks for kids, I think everybody would say absolutely, but what's it gonna cost? And that's what it boils down to, is what this number comes out to. So I'll be working with our assessor's office to get updated data, and I'm gonna bring it forward to this committee. I'd like the committee to use that data, and I don't mind being a resource, but to come to their own conclusion about what that number would be. We can work with the state and have them confirm what it would be, so that by the time it went to a town meeting vote, the community would know that these weren't numbers that are coming down from Beacon Hill, and they're not numbers coming from my office, they're numbers coming from this committee and coming from peers in their community. And that's something that I think is important. So with that said, with that very broad overview, does anybody have any questions, I guess, to start? And we can go from there. Mr. Cloutier?
Yes, I have a question. That $54 is annually, is that yearly or 4 times a year
Annual, so that'd be the total
for the year?
for the year.
Okay. Because I've had a lot of calls from elderly that are concerned, and they're wondering how it affects them. Because right now, we're in a tight budget time, and also with the income that's fixed. They just finally got a raise after 3 years. They're wondering, how high it's gonna hurt them.
Oh, about Social Security, you mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
Lionel, can I ask you a question, please?
Sure.
If that's okay. How many of these people that you've spoken to,
20,
20, how many own their homes?
oh, quite a few.
Okay.
Well, I'm just mentioning the 20 that called my
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, and how, out of those, is it 3/4?
I'd say about 3/4 of them are very concerned about where
And
it's
they
going,
own their own home?
the taxes.
Okay, thanks.
And it's a valid question, and there are exemptions in there for low income and for elderly, and so I think I'd like to try to explore what that means too, because the last thing that I want is for us to not be sensitive to folks on fixed incomes. Like I said, we don't want to tax people out of town. That's not the purpose of this exercise. I think the hope in a longer term, from where I sit in terms of the community as it is today and the potential for what it could be in the future, the most important thing for me is trying to take some of the tax burden off the shoulders of our residents. And the best way to do that is to build a stronger commercial tax base. And I think what we've seen historically in town, unfortunately, from a post-World War II decline into modern times, we saw a lot of storefronts close. We saw a lot of our infrastructure kind of fall into disrepair. And a lot of that was due to financial situations that were largely outside of everybody's control. I think the hope here is that by investing in these types of initiatives, in affordable housing, in historic preservation, in open space and rec, that it would incentivize private industry or those in the commercial sector to invest their money back into the community, which would create jobs, which would fill in those storefronts, and those businesses would be paying taxes. And I think that's the most important piece, as you hear Winchendon oftentimes described as a bedroom community, depending who you ask, but this used to be a flourishing manufacturing hub, which is why, the town hall that we're sitting in looks like this. If that manufacturing wasn't a component of this town, we wouldn't be sitting in a grand room like this in a building that looks like this. And I think it's trying to get back to where the town was, or get closer back to where it was in its heyday. And I think that the tools that the CPA provides are something that would help this community trend back towards that direction.
Thank you.
I'd like a clarification on the CPA revenue on this chart. So we have this is this is what each household will pay additionally, and then you have the revenue. Is that a total of what everybody's paying, or is that the match amount? And is it a dollar for dollar match? Like, if we pay 250 grand in taxes additionally, the state gives us back 250 a year? Is it dollar for dollar like that? Because I've heard different numbers, like where it was 45 grand to the average community or 70 grand payout. Are those payouts separate from the dollar for dollar match, or am I confusing the dollar for dollar match?
Are you referencing the bottom right corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think that's an excellent question. So it varies from community to community. So, and I think the presentation talked about it briefly, but it didn't really apply to us. So on average, it's about 39% match.
Okay.
But because we are a community of limited means, we qualify for 100% match. So that's
We
something-
do.
So it would be dollar for dollar,
Okay.
based on the most recent statistics they gave us, but I don't anticipate them to have changed.
So that's based on our situation now. What if we get in a better situation? Will that 100% match decrease then?
I imagine it would, and I don't know what threshold we'd have to hit to be out of that category.
Okay.
And I don't know if it's something that they would completely pull the floor out from, or if they would step it back in increments. I don't anticipate that it would happen within that 5-year period, but I think if it's the 100% match factor that really entices people to look into this and take it seriously, and then if that's off the table, the community could always vote to pull it back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say on the website from the CPA, they actually publish the decile ranking town by town in Massachusetts. So you can see, towns that are demographically, economically similar to us, which decile they rank in and what their match percentage was. And some of them appear to be over 100%, which was pretty impressive. But, that's obviously subject to change as the economy changes.
My first impression is this is like a 401K for the town. Not a retirement per se, but a preservation. And, the more we contribute, the more we get back as a match. And to be able to be matched 100% is really something.
The one other thing I'd be curious about is getting in touch with people who are responsible for the campaigns in Royalston and Templeton, like our kind of peer towns. How did those campaigns go for them? Was that 2 years ago or 20 years ago? And, what were their challenges, if those would be similar to ours?
Sure, and I could reach out on behalf of this committee if you'd like, and maybe see if the chairs of their CPCs would be available for a future meeting. And it might be helpful to hear directly from them what type of impact it's had in their community, and not only the path it took to get them there, but how it's actually working for them today.
That's a good idea.
I think would be helpful.
That meeting on the Commons that was on Friday,
Yeah.
there was a bunch of people there that are really proactive about telling their experience and advising new people. And so I think if we reached out to them, they would
Yeah.
put us in contact with some people that are really enthusiastic about getting other towns on board.
Yeah, success stories from nearby towns would be really valuable, I think, or challenges, failures.
That meeting on Friday, is that Zoom or is it in person?
It was.
It already happened on Zoom, yeah.
But I think they recorded it, so I'll see if I can find the recording and I'll forward it
So
to
it was
everybody.
last Friday?
Yeah.
Okay, I missed it then.
I will forward you the link when I hunt it down. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, positive or negative, indifferent?
I think that in order to get this to pass at town meeting, that we need to think about our PR and how we're going to present it to the town and to the people in the town. That's we can present it in a way, we have to kind of be like salesmen and present it in a way that they can't say no.
That's the gist of that meeting that I went to, was basically about the sale, and I worry that the tone of them as a resource is about how to sell it and less about what it does for the town. And I think at the same time, we definitely need to do what you're saying, but at the same time, we need to really actually look at examples of, hypotheticals of what it can do, so that when we sell it, we actually have some backup, as opposed to
Yeah.
giving out one average number, because, there's no such thing as an average in the real world. It's, there's a median, and one property's worth 50 grand and one's worth 400, and it, just selling one number doesn't really help. So I think we need to do that and do due diligence on how we see it working within our town. We need to talk to like the HEAL committee and see what we could add to them, et cetera, the open space guys and all that stuff. Because I think that's equally important to what you're saying.
Yeah. I also forgot to mention that I'm on the master plan implementation committee, so I can go there with it too.
That's perfect.
Any thoughts from a recreation standpoint?
No, I mean, like, the presentation is great and everything. I'm just more interested in the analysis that you said you were gonna come up with about the actual dollars and how many exemptions do we really have in town that fall in the lower category or in the senior category, so how much are we pulling from the middle class and stuff like that. So I think I'm more into the numbers, so that's what I'm waiting for.
Sure. We'll dig into that data in due time. So if there aren't any other questions on a broader view, just moving down the agenda, in terms of next steps and future meeting dates. So it would be my hope that you'd all be available to meet once a month. We talked about, whether doing it in person or hybrid or doing it over Zoom. And then I think some good points have been brought up that Zoom meetings in terms of accessibility are preferable. And I think for something like this, it's helpful for people to come in and just kind of pop in. And so I think going forward, if the committee would like that, we can certainly do that, with the exception of maybe one or two public forums to be hosted at the Council on Aging or the schools, or really anywhere of the committee's choice, but just tossing those two out. You'd be meeting monthly from now pretty much through November. So it would bring it right up to the ballot in November. And there's a lot of topics to kind of cover between now and then. So I will definitely work to get as much data for you as I possibly can. So feel free to use me as a resource. Shoot me an email or give my office a call, and I'll dig up realistically anything you need. Is there any interest in doing a board organization at this time, or would you like to give it another meeting? Kind of feel it out a little bit?
We're missing 4 members.
Mm-hmm.
It might be well worthwhile to wait.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to.
I don't think we have to
Can't
rush
hear you.
into it.
They can't hear
Lean
you.
towards the mic.
Could you hear me? No.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. How do we call a vote though, without being organized?
That's
I think that we should appoint some sort of board, because, I mean, they didn't make it for a reason. So I think the people that are here in person are committed.
That's true too.
I agree.
It's gonna be a long night.
Who is good at committee
Scary.
logistics? I have no experience in it, but
I volunteer to be vice chair.
Is there a second for that self-motion?
I'll second that motion.
All right, well, we're starting somewhere.
Why don't we, do we want to vote for the whole slate at once?
It might be nice to do it in a block if you'd like.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that would like to self-nominate themselves to be chair, or that would like to burden one of their peers with the task of being chair?
I've got experience, multiple boards and committees, but I
I'll
don't
second
really
his.
need it. so. I know Lionel doesn't want me to be.
I never said that.
Don't be shy. If you want to do it, Lionel. No? What about, you don't have to have experience. We'll help you.
I'd honestly rather put my energy towards
Okay.
analyzing the bulk of the data and stuff than
Okay.
get my head around it, as opposed to get my head around how to run a committee.
I make a motion, we ask David Romanowski to be chairman of the board.
I second it.
All right. All those in favor for Mr. Romanowski to be chair, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. And there was, you want
We've got a nomination and a second for, excuse me, I can't remember your.
Amanda
Amanda, be
Phillips.
vice chair. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
He's a
And you
natural
said we need a clerk too.
Preferably. Anybody good at taking minutes? Or anybody want to learn?
Mrs. Bradley?
I can do it.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Nay? Opposed? No?
All right.
We probably need to set meeting dates, right?
Mhm.
Does anybody have a preference as to day or week?
Mondays
No,
are
there's-
nice. I like Mondays so far.
I think Mondays are good too.
Monday works good.
7
Fine.
o'clock, good?
That's fine.
Okay. We don't want to do it on a select board meeting night.
That is correct. So I'd say maybe the first Monday of every month.
Okay.
I think that'll ensure that I'm clear.
Okay.
And we'll try to avoid the Board of Health. You're welcome.
I was gonna say that would be back to back, yeah.
Yeah.
When do you meet, at 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
Okay. Usually, does it last more than an hour, usually?
It depends on the topics, but sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it can be longer. Depends on the permit or the different agenda, so
Okay.
generally about an hour.
So maybe you can do 7:30?
7:30, too late for anyone?
No.
Okay. So everybody agree with that? I don't know if we need to take a vote, but it's good for everybody, that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's the date on that?
All right, and then just as a recap of the next steps, I will go seek out the contact information for the CPC chairs of Templeton and Royalston. I will hunt down that video presentation from last Friday and forward it to everybody on the board. And I will work with the assessor's office to gather data, and I'll send it to this committee in advance, and then maybe at your next meeting, we can really dig into what those numbers be to see what, what would truly be reflective of the community.
I'm curious, can you get the information on what qualifies us to be 100% on the
Yes.
match?
I'll get back, and honestly, I might even ask the executive of the Community Preservation Coalition, Stuart Sagnor, to see if he'll come in and maybe walk the group through any questions you might have.
Would it be possible, Justin, to get the updated information for Winchendon prior to the next meeting, so that we'd have a chance to review it before we got here?
I'll get it to you a week in advance or so.
Okay. In an editable format?
Yep.
Okay.
Are there things we as committee members should be or could be doing between now and the next meeting? I feel like we've added a lot of to-dos to your checklist. Without-
I mean, if Mr. Chair, if I may, I think this is kind of a fluid process, so any data or information or anything of value that you find between now and then, I would just reach out to the chair and see if it's something that could be put on the agenda to discuss. I don't mind, doing some heavy lifting here, but if there's anything that you want to chip away at or help with as a group.
One thing I'd be curious about from the other board members is what a CPA eligible project might be that you would be excited to see happen in Winchendon. I think there's a big variety of project areas, and not all of us are familiar with all of them, and so it would be cool to get a sense of what the outer bounds of what's possible are. As far as
That's our homework assignment?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a
I'd
good
like some
exercise.
clarification on the open meeting laws applying to a committee. So one of us can email the bunch some pertinent data, but we can't discuss it as a group, or we can email something to each individual, like if I find some research. What are the boundaries on that?
Sure, so and that's actually a good point. So in terms of open meeting law, you can communicate one-on-one, but you can't have group conversations outside of the meeting. So if you are passing something on via email, I find it always best to BCC so that you avoid people hitting reply all inadvertently and accidentally having an open meeting law violation discussion in your emails. So that's your best bet. Obviously, it's a small town and people talk and, people have conversations. But I would say just do your best to not talk this specific topic with other appointed board members to the best of your ability.
But sharing information is
You can
totally fine, so as long as you BCC it.
Yeah, you just can't deliberate.
Okay.
All right.
Would it be best to disseminate it through the chair and go in one way? Because we don't want to have any discussion, we just want to feed, right? Does that make sense? So we don't have different paths that it's going through.
Yeah, I think
That'd make it
that's
easier
sometimes
anyway.
useful.
How do you guys feel about that?
That's fine with me.
I had an unrelated modeling question, given that we can't talk about this in groups outside of the meeting, that I wanted to float, which is, reading on the website, it sounded like this state CPA fund is provided by real estate transfer taxes. What would it take, easy, medium, hard, to look at the Winchendon property sale records of the past 20 years and figure out how much we've put into that fund that's gone to other towns because we're not part of this?
Oh,
Ooh, interesting.
yeah, that is good.
That would be good for argument 4.
I mean, it's our money. Anyone who's bought a house here in the last
Right.
20 years has paid that. And
But I think that's an excellent point. All the money that people in town have been paying into this fund for decades that's been going to other towns and never came back is an interesting question. I can reach out. I have a contact at the Registry of Deeds, and they might just have some way to pull that data easily.
that'd be great.
You could query all the deeds that have been filed with them and just tally the number. It comes out kind of sort of a spreadsheet. And
Is it a
I think
flat?
they are enumerated.
Is it a flat fee or is it a percentage of the property value at sale? Do we know?
It varies, but it has also varied historically over that time period. So it'd be hard to say, like, there are 50,000 transactions and then just multiply it by a fee.
Yeah.
But a question worth asking. All right.
No further questions.
Why don't I take it upon myself to work with Town Hall and get a good contact list of everyone, so everybody has emails and names to put against the emails.
Perfect. All right.
And everybody's comfortable with the Zoom format?
I like in person. I like the hybrid where you have some in person and someone's, but
Well, case rates are low, it's nice.
I personally, I float between here and Maryland, and so the Zoom works better for me. But on a separate note, during the pandemic, we had a lot of people participate in meetings that did affect change in this town that otherwise wouldn't be coming to meetings because of Zoom. You know, people, the bulk of workers in this town commute, you know, an average of 40 minutes to an hour plus, and, you know, they want to come home and take a shower on Monday night before they go to work the next day and not skip a meal and stuff. So, I mean, we had, the idea of this committee is to bring it to the public, and we need their support. And I know there's more people that will show up at a Zoom meeting than won't show up because it's a Zoom meeting, just based on the experience of the past 2 years.
have you done a hybrid before where you have some people in person and some people?
I have
via Zoom?
not been part of that, so.
Do we
I
have the
don't-
capability in town to do that?
It's rocky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be great if it worked, if it was logistically.
Well, I just came from a meeting upstairs where we were doing it.
We can try. I mean, I think if the bulk of the people are in the room, there's a smaller handful that are remote. I think it's doable. But we have run into some complications. I think in the smaller room, it's a little bit easier, but when we have that same equipment based in here, I think it's just harder because it's a bigger room and the voices don't pick up as well. But we can try to iron something out between now and then and see if we can get something up and running.
One last question, actually. Remind me the months that the spring and fall town elections are in, or not town elections,
Town meeting.
town halls.
Town meetings,
Yeah.
yeah, so the annual is in May, and the special is typically in late October, early November.
So if we were to propose CPA at the special town meeting, that would be too late to run a campaign for the municipal election, right? That window's like a week or two.
For the actual ballot vote, so there is a requirement, and I have to double check, but I believe it's that if you pass it at a town meeting, it needs to be 35 days or no fewer than 35 days prior to ballot vote, which I think is exclusively for the purpose that there needs to be lead time to print the ballots.
Yeah.
But we can confirm that timeline as well.
So it's, I mean, it's an interesting question for us, I think, whether we want to try to come to a decision by the May town meeting, so that if the decision is yes and the town meeting is yes, there's enough time to organize campaign, et cetera.
I feel like we need more than May.
Yeah.
And I also think that if we can put the campaigning effort towards getting it on the ballot as well as the ballot, do them
Totally.
simultaneously, I think you'll get more likely ballot voters. Whereas if it's just the select old quorum that shows up for the town meeting,
It's
the
very
people that
small.
only show up for the ballot are gonna be like, well, they snuck this on us and I don't like it and I don't know anything about it yet. So
Yeah.
if we target everybody, if we decide we like it and we wanna do it, then if we target everybody, the ballot and the town meeting as one campaign, I think it's gonna be stronger if there's any way we can get that 35-day time between the special town meeting and the ballot.
That would put it in early October, which is doable. I mean, technically, you can call a special town meeting, or the Board of Selectmen can call a special town meeting at any time. So you could design it to fall within whatever parameters you would need for voting purposes.
Yeah, it would be nice to only build that focus and attention once.
Yeah. And it is a distinct group, you know, like you can look at them the same, like the town meeting voters and the ballot voters aren't I mean, they do mix and match, obviously, but they're not necessarily the same demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you guys concluding?
We may not have to decide by May, I think it sounds like.
That's my tendency. That's
Yeah.
what I'm leaning towards.
Is try to decide by May?
No. Give us all the
ourselves
way
till
till
October.
October to do the campaign. I mean, we still need to decide exactly what it is and whether we think it's good for the town.
Yeah.
When I went to that meeting, and my research so far, which is not a lot, is it's a lot more complicated than just talking about it for one meeting, you know, or 3 meetings. There's a lot more to it and what it's gonna look like for us, and there's more tailoring involved than just accepting it or not, and we have to present what we want to accept. Like, there's so many options on how much we want to sign up for, and then how we envision the final committee deciding things, and, you know, so I think the more time we have, like, it'd be good to know what we're talking about before we sell it. And it's not a simple thing, it's pretty complex.
Why don't we go over on the agenda for the next meeting, why don't we revisit the logistics going forward, the milestones and what needs to be accomplished when?
Yeah.
For the best outcome. Okay.
And that's why you're the chair.
Excuse me?
And that's why you're the chair.
No, I like to delegate, that's. And then we were talking about Zoom too, so are we going to attempt to hold the next meeting via Zoom or hybrid as opposed to in person? Is that what I'm hearing from folks?
Yes, for me.
I'll try to iron out the hybrid piece, but if not, it may have to be Zoom for the next one, and then we can kind of get into it. But it's, unfortunately, in my experience so far, the hybrid, especially if you're trying to broadcast at the same time, has been nightmarish. That said, we can try to find a way to make it work better. I don't think it's impossible. I think we just need better equipment, so.
Could we
I
meet
mean, if you could
upstairs
make
we
it
need?
work, it'd be a model for the BOS, which I know for a fact you'll get more people showing up to BOS meetings if you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they've obviously shunned the Zoom meeting style, so you'll get more participation from the community, especially the outskirts of town, you know, which are a large part of the tax-paying base, if you can make that work.
Right.
How do other folks feel about that? I know you're for it, you're for it,
Either way for me.
either way.
Yeah, I prefer to be here, but Zoom's fine.
Okay,
I have a problem with a computer, so,
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've
hopefully
seen you on
hybrid.
Zoom and you did just fine.
well,
I've seen you on many Zoom meetings where you participated and everybody heard you and you heard everybody. I don't know what you're
With-
talking about.
with help, with a lot of help.
So hopefully hybrid, if we did, you say it's working well upstairs?
It seems to work better in a smaller room. I think it's that the speakers interfere because it turns its head towards whoever's speaking, but the speakers just make it constantly stare at the speakers, which is a pretty tremendous flaw. But I think if we did do it upstairs in the upstairs conference room, it'd probably be an easier go. And if rather than a broadcast meeting, we just recorded it and posted it later, I don't think we really need to broadcast these live. So that's the only thing you'd really lose.
Okay.
If you don't mind a visitor, I'll try Zoom again.
Okay.
Could we get funding under the CPA for really kicking Zoom setup?
I mean, that could be an administrative expense down the road, but
There we go.
Well, didn't the BOS already ask for that? And-
so we have an owl is what it's called, but it does not work in this room because of the speakers. So we
It
need it,
does work really well upstairs.
but it works well upstairs because it doesn't have speakers. It has voice detection, so it just looks at whoever's speaking. But whenever we run it down here, it just looks at the wall. speakers.
Because of the echo.
Yep. All right,
Okay, any other business or discussion?
Any questions from the audience?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Don't forget the homework assignment.
Yeah, yeah.
Who made a motion?
I did.
Anyone second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to want to stay here longer?
No.
Okay, adjourned at 8:10.